Good afternoon. It is now 3 o'clock. I would like to call to order the Richland County Detention Center Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you call the vote? Not the vote, I'm sorry. Can you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Pugh,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
English.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval for the minutes of July 25th, 2023.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, can you call for the vote?
Pugh,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, ma'am. Item number 3 on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda is the adoption of the agenda for today's meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, can you call for the vote?
Pugh,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, ma'am. On to item number 4 on the agenda. Discussion items. Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center progress update. Mr. Brown, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I want to just spend a few moments here sharing some information with you related to the progress that we've made. As you may recall, we submitted a plan of action to the Department of Corrections. Since the submittal of that plan, we have been working that plan as we have presented both to you and to the Department of Corrections. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of those items of note. One of the items we talked about was the performance of the lock system. We talked about them updating those locks in August. They did start updating those locks in August, so we are currently in that process. They're currently working in the special housing unit location, and then from there, we hope they'll move from there to our Yankee unit, but right now, that's where they're currently operating. We at the same time have a couple other programs that are happening in that same unit, everything from painting to, we talked about the plumbing in there. We talked about the door jams on the cells themselves, the slats.
Mr. Brown,
Yes, sir.
Can we, that seems to fall up under the infrastructure part. Can we just follow the agenda so that way we'll stay on task with those that have the agenda
Absolutely.
that was published? So can we talk about the compliance director and then we'll move on to the infrastructure stuff?
Never thought you would ask, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
So excited about the progress in the infrastructure itself that I skipped right past the compliance director, which I'm equally as excited about. So we were able to actually hire a gentleman who is he's a military veteran. He's worked in the corrections environment for over 25 years. He's actually recently worked at the South Carolina Department of Corrections. And so we hired him. He's been on staff with us now for a couple of weeks. A gentleman by the name of Mr. James Lipscomb. So we're very excited to have him. He's actually had experience with the Department of Corrections during looking at compliance issues related to the Department of Corrections. So we feel like he's well qualified to assist us here. And we're really excited about that, Mr. Chair.
Sure. So, and in Mr. Lipscomb's role, I hope I didn't butcher his name. Exactly what will he be doing as the compliance director? Will he be reporting to? And how does this hire help us move forward with just creating a better environment in Alvin S. Glenn?
All good questions, sir. So the reporting structure is that Mr. Lipscomb will report directly to me as the county administrator. So what you will have is you will have an individual that's in the facility who has correctional experience, but who can look at the issues that maybe exist and provide, report out, and also recommendations for addressing those. He will also be looking at any compliance-related matters that we're responsible for and reporting that all to me. So while he will work with the facility, the idea is that there's independence so that he doesn't have to be concerned about whether or not if he reported something out and someone didn't want to share it, that there would be somehow not shared. So the reporting structure goes from myself as the county administrator to the compliance director reporting to me within that facility. And of course, he will work parallel with the director and the team that is there, but ultimately he reports to the county administrator. And the way he would help us move forward is, as we talked about related compliance matters, you have someone that's specifically and solely focused on making sure that any items that we are supposed to be compliant with as far as minimum jail standards, that we are addressing those items and that we stay up to speed with those standards.
Before we move on, I'd like to recognize my colleague, Mr. Don Weaver, Councilman Don Weaver, for sitting in on the meeting, and also Councilwoman Gretchen Barron, who's joining us online. I just want to acknowledge my colleagues.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
All right, so staying along the lines of compliance, got a quick question for you, Mr. Administrator. Where are we as it pertains to the South Carolina Department of Corrections inquiry on Alvin S. Glenn? Because as we know that there's a deadline of September the 28th that we have to respond to the inquiry made by the South Carolina Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I could, I'd just take just a brief moment for those who may not be aware of how this came up. One of the things that we talked about in our plan with the South Carolina Department of Corrections was maintaining this level of communication. So I have been speaking with the division compliance individual, Mr. Blake Taylor, a number of times and trying to build a relationship so I can make sure that the county has a connection with what needs to be done and who are the right people to talk to. As a part of one of our conversations, Mr. Taylor said it was fortuitous that I reached out to him because he was going to call me. And he informed me that there was an opportunity for Richland County to receive some technical assistance, which would allow us to potentially prioritize areas that we had identified that we were already working on, and maybe that would help us focus our specific areas that they thought might need more attention more quickly. And as a result of that, I accepted that offer of technical assistance. And so, because we talked about, we want to make sure that we can be the best that we can be, and that anyone that was trying to help us, we wanted to make sure that we accepted that help and addressed it accordingly. Since then, we received some information about some of the additional things that we could do, and the Department of Corrections said that as a part of that, they would like a response. That while though the technical assistance was voluntary, that they felt as though it would be helpful if they received a response to the information. So we plan on responding in the timeline in which they have provided, even though it was a voluntary program and we chose to participate. Again, we have no issue with sharing the steps that we're making from a progress perspective.
Mr. Brown, could you elaborate a little bit on exactly what technical assistance is by giving an example and explain a little bit more about what the actual volunteer program that we're taking part in with the Department of Corrections?
Well, my understanding this was unique for the Department of Corrections, that this is not something they had previously done, but taking the opportunity, my understanding of technical assistance from working with other areas of county government would be someone would come to you and they would look at something that you had going on, a process or a system or something of that nature. They would point out to you opportunities for you to use a best practice or a standard that maybe existed, and then provide you a resource to connect you. So, for example, if we didn't know how to quickly get something that they wanted us to implement, then they may not say to us, here's who to use, but they would say the resources for this are here. Right? They would show you and they would connect you with opportunities for you to improve. So show you what it is that they're looking for in terms of a best practice or a standard, and then provide you with information about how you could connect to that resource that could allow you to achieve that ultimate goal that they were hoping that you would achieve. And so in what we received were some observations related to some areas of the facility. Some observations we already had as a result of the inspection, from their annual inspection. But from a technical assistance standpoint, it really was more observations. It wasn't, here's information that will connect you to a resource, but we still took that information and we're working from it, and we've taken some steps, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, just in general. But from a technical assistance standpoint, I think the way they viewed it is, we'll provide some observations for you, and then from there, hope that you would take some steps to address our observations.
Mr. Brown, in our research, did we do any research as far as any other detention centers in our region, in the South, or anywhere nearby us that have received technical assistance from the Department of Corrections in the past or currently receiving those technical assistance?
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that this is something that was new and not something that was consistent with, prior organizations nor ours. I don't want to misspeak, but it's my understanding.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Mr. Wright, you recognize?
I would also like to just put out there that even though it's been kind of termed a deadline, the Department of Corrections, the only real oversight they have legally is the annual inspection that they do at the facility and things that regarding that. So Mr. Brown has stated that, there will be a response to it, but it's not a mandatory response. It's not something it's not a legal requirement. So it's not a real deadline because it's not something that we had to do in the first place. And it's a situation where when the technical assistance was offered, Richland County has been requesting from the Department of Corrections, from other entities, like, hey, we have these situations. Is there any recommendations or any help anyone can give? And basically everyone said no. So when the Department of Corrections reached out and said, hey, we have this technical assistance that we can provide, are you willing to allow us to come in and do it? Of course, the administration said yes.
So along the lines of the technical assistance, was there anything in writing to describe what the technical assistance was going to be, or this is just something that we verbally decided with them that we were going to do, become part of a volunteer program without any guidelines or rules, outlining what this technical assistance is?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And when I talked a little bit earlier about how this came about, with as close to exact as it can be, that was pretty close. It really was a conversation via phone where the conversation was this would allow Richland County to prioritize areas that you've identified in your plan that need to be addressed. And so I thought, certainly that would be a good opportunity for us. I think we spoke one day, I thought about it, had some internal conversations. I think less than 48 hours, I called back and said, and I think sent an email, said, yes, we'll, be interested in the technical assistance. Because again, my focus as a member of Alvin's Glen Detention Center as the facility administrator, and I know the team that's there, we literally want to make that place as good as it can be from our perspective. And so the offer for technical assistance to prioritize the plan that we had submitted, and just to remind you, we submitted literally two official plan and then 2 supplemental documents that literally spelled out area by area how we were going to improve the facility. And so we thought if the Department of Corrections was going to then say prioritize these areas, that certainly that would be helpful since they'll be doing the inspections and they would know what they believe to be immediate areas of concern.
So in this response for the 28th, exactly what are we outlining? What are we outlining in the response to the volunteer program that we're in?
So some of the things we'll be doing will be consistent with what we've provided them, but in some areas where they pointed out specific things related to some of security, we'll provide that information to them and show them how we have addressed that or how we are addressing it. And so that's what we'll be doing. They basically provided us a template, if you will. And so we will basically respond to their template and share with them, what's been done, what we are doing, and if there are things that are longer term, what our plan is there. And again, they've acknowledged some of these things. I know that a lot of times we're not having those conversations, but they've acknowledged that they understand because of the nature of the work and the environment that the work has to be done in, that these things are not short-term fixes. And they, have acknowledged that to us. So we acknowledge them acknowledging that, but at the same time, we feel confident that we're going to respond to them and show them that the pathway that we're on is one that shows that we're taking positive steps. And we talk later about the progress. They were in the facility, so they saw it. So they know that the things that we said we were doing, that we were in a process of doing them because they were in the facility and saw us taking those steps.
So not speaking for my colleagues on the committee, but if I'm unpacking this the right way, basically what you're saying is that there are no sanctions from the South Carolina Department of Corrections. This is merely us responding to their technical assistance that they're going to provide for us to help us move in the right direction.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Anybody got any comments? Go ahead, Mr.
Mr. Brown, question about the compliance director. You mentioned something about his correctional experience. How many years in corrections?
Over 25 years.
And spent in South Carolina Department of Corrections?
No, sir.
Or corrections in various states?
Various states.
Okay. And I think this is our first time hiring a compliance director for the Alvinus Glen Detention Center?
Yes, sir. This is a new position that was created by me as a part of our efforts to bolster up our attention at the facility.
Segue to my next question, which was what prompted you and your team to go the direction of a compliance director? Was that something that was prompted, I guess, by conversations with the Department of Corrections, or just your own research? How did that come about, that decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council Chair Walker, but not Chair of the Committee Walker. So that's a good question. So the way this position came about is because we wanted to really be able to show our specific focus and attention to being compliant with all local, state, and federal laws related to Alvinus Glen Detention Center. And we thought it would be important to make sure that in the reporting chain that it was clear that no one in the facility could not report something out because their supervisor told them, keep it quiet. So the compliance director, that's why the position reports to the county administrator. So not that we don't have faith in other people in the facility, but we wanted to show that there's a distinct line of concern and address it by saying that we value compliance, and we're going to hire somebody that focuses on compliance and put them in a position of authority so that there was clear that their expectation is there is no barrier to knowing what needs to be done in the facility and it being reported out to the appropriate people.
In other words, just having sufficient checks and balances.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, if I may. Yes, sir. I sort of gleaned from your comments in response to Chairman Pugh's questions about, I guess, this reporting or report that has to go to the state or the Department of Corrections, that this has been more of a collaborative effort between the county and the Department of Corrections, as opposed to one that's a little more paternalistic, i.e. the Department of Corrections sort of lording over Richland County and making demands of us. It's been more collaborative. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir. It was an offer, and I accepted the offer. I could have declined the offer, but based off what we talked about, the council, the committee, administration, we accepted the offer in good faith that we could utilize the information to help us be better.
The reason I asked that question, Mr. Brown, just because of what's been reported in various news outlets, it could easily give one the impression that Richland County is somehow a bad actor when it comes to our detention facility, and that it's been necessary for the state to intervene to sort of compel us to do the right thing, when in fact what I'm hearing from you is that this has been a collaborative effort, one in which overtures have been extended, no pun intended, to various jails just to get some insight, right, as to what they're doing right and how we can implement that with our detention facility, and that the state made this offer of assistance and that we willfully accept it. So thank you for clarifying that. I just want you to know that is not what's being reported, and I want that to be put on the record, but thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Pugh.
Mr. Chair, if I just may very
Yes, sir,
briefly.
Mr. Brown.
And I did share that. I received, and I won't say from which outlets, but I received direct questions about that. And I answered very directly. I was very open. I was very transparent. I was very communicative about the fact that we had received this offer and that we had chosen to accept it. I know that's not what was reported. I don't know why that wasn't the case, but just know that I shared that to multiple outlets, and they chose to do something different with that information, even though they had received that knowledge.
Chairman Pugh. Tells me one more time, and Mr. Brown, this is not a deadline that we're coming up on, right? This was, again, an offer that was extended. the county agreed to accept the offer, and the Department of Corrections has asked that you provide an update or report by a specific date. But this is not a hard deadline, as been reported in various media outlets. Would that be correct?
According to the county attorney, based off the nature of the assistance, and again, to Mr. Pugh's question, if you don't mind me mixing these two together.
Well, Mr. Brown, let me tell you what I mean by deadline.
Right.
When I say deadline, I mean pretty much a drop-dead date.
Correct.
That's not what this is,
And,
right?
and that information at the beginning of the process was never discussed. That information came out later on, and I addressed the question with the Department of Corrections and said, where's the deadline coming from? Technical assistance doesn't normally have a deadline. They provide you information as a resource, and the Department of Corrections' response was, well, we thought that it would be important, based off what we shared, that we receive some kind of response, and so we put that information in there so we can get a response.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir, Ms. Wright.
Yes, and as stated, the only authority that the Department of Corrections would have over Richland County is pursuant to the annual inspection, which this was not. So they would not even have the authority to enforce a deadline on Richland County regarding any voluntary technical assistance. So it's not a deadline because legally there is no legal consequence because it's not something that the Department of Corrections can legally do regarding that. And if I may, Mr. Chair, since we did talk about some of the things that have been said in the media about Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center, and about the Department of Corrections, I actually did notice a piece regarding the Department of Corrections where they talked about contraband. Talks about some of the officers at the Department of Corrections that were arrested for different reasons. The difference between how it was said with the Department of Corrections, even though the exact same issues that Alvin S. Glenn has, was that their director was praised for, rooting things out and for fixing things. But when it comes to Alvin S. Glenn, it seems that it's always called troubled, or there are issues going on when it's literally the exact same issues. It's just put in a different light for some reason when it's Alvin S. Glenn. And these are same issues that not only the Department of Corrections has, but every other local detention center has. It's a situation where, of course, we've recently had a bond reform, so the population is up. So, of course, the percentage of population to detain detention center officers is a little different now because there are more population there. So this is a situation where, beyond the control of either Richland County or Alvin S. Glenn, there are more people there. Of course, people are in jail generally for a reason, and they don't automatically become this model citizens when they enter a detention facility. So you have people, you have gang members, and they fight and do things that are illegal on the outside. There's no reason to believe they would change and not do that on the inside. So I just think some of the reporting has been misleading, and some just downright untrue. And regarding one situation we recently had, there are a couple of articles that was said, like, after rape at Richland Jail, victim was returned to same dorm. Lawyers say he was raped again. That is just untrue. Not true. We can even show that it's not true. Things are said, and attorneys or other people are allowed to say in the press, to say things that have no facts to back them up. Some things are facts to say that they're actually, this is not the truth. So I think that when it comes to certain things that are said in the media, or certain things regarding, say, maybe some other attorneys, that there are reasons that they're being said. Like, of course, I'll say another one. I'll read another thing where it said, where attorneys said that hell on earth, and there are many other cases piling up. And the thing is, like, most of these cases, to be honest, are from the same law firm. And they have a reason to say the things they're saying. So and there's, of course, we have to wait on investigations to be completed before we say anything, but they can just go out and say anything, regardless if it has a basis in fact or not, and it'll be printed. So we can't just go out there and say something with no facts to back it up. We have to wait to see for either the sheriff's department to investigate, for the medical evaluations to come in to verify or to dispute certain things. So I just think that, these are things that, as the council and as the public, to keep in mind, because, there are people at Alvinus Glen, the administration, even you have done a lot of things to try to make some changes, some positive changes at Alvinus Glen and for the county in general. And I just think it's disingenuous when you have certain attorneys or law firms that come, basically, to be honest, to line their pockets with taxpayer funds. They want to do that, and they'll say anything to do it. And I just think that's disingenuous. And I think that the court has recognized, the people in certain positions of authority have recognized all the things that county council, that administration, and that Alvinus Glen has done to progress. And for some reason, there seems to be a concerted effort by certain individuals or certain entities to just make sure or try to ensure that Alvinus Glen fails.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Well, I do want to say this on the record that we're grateful for the technical assistance from the Department of Corrections, and we welcome any assistance, and we're also looking forward to responding to whatever they want us to respond to as far as it comes with the technical assistance. And I thank you guys for what you do as far as when it comes down to making sure that we stay abreast of what's going on. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to waste our committee's time talking about things that we can't control. And all we can do is control the things that we can control as a body. And so that's what our focus is for this ad hoc committee. Moving on to item A2, infrastructure. Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir. As you're talking about those things we can control, we've moved forward with our plan. I mentioned that we have provided a plan of action. We're working that plan of action that currently consists of, we have contractors now currently operating in the facility, doing everything from painting to plumbing to light fixtures to the locking system to the exterior with the yard work and maintenance. And there are a couple other things as well. And all of those things that we talked about in the plan, we're working that plan, and we've shared that information with you. And we feel confident that as you see, we'll show you future pictures like we did with the kitchen where you saw the before and after. We'll do something similar so that you can see the progress. But you are certainly more than welcome as members of the body, as you have done a couple times before, to see the progress in person as well. So I know maybe people may not know that, but all the council members went out to the facility. They took a look at the progress. They took a look at the work that needed to be done. And we've acknowledged there's opportunities for us to improve, and that's why we put out an improvement plan, and we're working that improvement plan, Mr. Chair.
Is that delayed picture, that before and after picture, still available online for folks to be able to go online and see what the kitchen looked like prior to the upgrades that we made at Alvinus Glen?
Yes, sir. If the only thing I would say is if a person did not necessarily attend that meeting, they may not know what date that was. But if you were to go to the agenda packet, I have done it because I've shared it with some other folks that have asked. You can click on it and it will pull just right back up, and you can see the before and after.
Is there not anywhere on our website that they could pull that up, or is that not appropriate to put on the website? Or without them having to go back into the archives of the YouTube channel and seeing from the actual meeting?
So the answer to your question is we could do something like that, but right now it's just under the website, under the agendas portion of it. But I hear what you're asking, sir.
We can look at that and any other pertinent information that could that could tell our story of the progress that we're making and the things that we're doing and changing. If we can make that accessible for our community and make it easy for them to access, that would be a great help.
Yes, sir. I'll ask the team to make note of that. They can hear you right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Brown?
No, sir, Mr. Chair, unless you have any additional questions on that item.
Mr. Weaver, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, I just had a few quick questions. All right, so you talked about the progress on the door locks are continuing. What percentage have been done? What percentage of the doors have been fixed with new locks, if you will? Any idea?
So we're currently in one unit right now. We talked about starting with the special housing unit in August. And so right now, that's where they are. They're doing all the doors in that special housing unit. So I cannot tell you how many doors in there have been completed because part of that is the locking mechanism, then it's the running the wiring and the conduit, but that is the first unit that they were doing, and that's where they started at, and right now they're, I believe, still on schedule with that unit.
Okay, but we don't know if like 10% of the doors have been done or 20% of the doors. We don't know that.
Not within that particular unit because all the doors, so they have to run all this. So what they're doing is they're placing the housing on the lock.
Okay.
They're then running the wiring and through the conduit to get to the lock, and then they will be placing the locks on there, and then the additional outer portion that has the light fixture that shows the working mechanism. So hearing your question, when we report out next, we could talk about the timeline of the unit that we're in and the number of cells, I guess, in that unit that have a completed lock. But right now, that whole unit is what's being renovated.
All right. Yeah, I think it's important to report back to the public what percentage of doors have been done, since we know that's one of the key problems down there. All right, so my second question is, which I'm not sure you're going to know this either, but when do we expect all the doors to be done? Is it December, March, next year? I know it was about a year project when we started.
Yes, sir.
Do we have an end date?
The timeline has not changed. I don't have that in front of me, but yes, sir, that timeline is listed out in the plan. It is actually on our website as well, so someone could go and look at that, click on that, and find out that information. I don't have it in front of me, but I do remember it being the latter part of 24.
So we're maybe 20% into it. Okay. All right, and then my final question is, well, two more. Has the staff noticed any improvements from the doors that have been done? Like, do we have any feedback yet on that?
So keep in mind that housing unit itself is completely being renovated. So
so it's vacant right now?
That's correct.
Okay.
So what we're doing is, if I may, Mr. Chair, just to answer the question a little bit more fully, what we're doing is we're renovating a unit. The plan then is to then have that unit available so that we can then move other individuals into that renovated unit and then do another unit.
Okay, I remember that from our tours.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we don't have that feedback yet. Okay, all right. My last question, and I don't know if this pertains to infrastructure, but I seem to recall we voted some money for cameras a while back because it was, we all talked about the concern of having no cameras on the outside. Has any progress been made on that?
Mr. Chair, can I say something?
Yes, sir. Mr. Wright?
Mr. Weaver, there's certain things that there's certain security things that I am concerned about discussing in the public.
Okay.
Because because there are certain things regarding security matters that are private and that aren't even foyable, and the public, it's not appropriate because we've had situations where things have been released to the public and detainees have used that to try to escape and do other things. So I am a little concerned about getting too specific about certain things.
Send me an email.
So I won't be sending you an email, but but the same thing he's saying, but I can answer I think the
County
bigger
attorney
question,
send that email.
the bigger question I think you're asking is, are we doing something with increasing camera coverage at the facility?
And I wasn't thinking so much about security,
and that's
more
what we talked
contraband, more of the contraband.
Just in general, we don't want to talk about anything related to it, but the funding, because I think you're asking about accounting for funding that we're talking about. So yes, there was funding that was put in that said we wanted to increase the area of coverage for cameras throughout the facility, just in general. Yes, sir.
And that funding has been approved?
That's part of what we talked about in the plan.
Okay.
So technically, you haven't approved it, but in
Okay.
some ways that because of the funding that we have, you can say that yes, sir, the county council has approved funding that could be allocated towards cameras.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir, any other questions for anybody from the committee? Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, let's move on to item 4B.
Yes, and Clerk Carrillo, if you could show pages 9, I believe, and 10. What you have here before you, just wanted you all to know that I, along with the director, will be attending the 2023 South Carolina Jail Administrators Association's conference. And what I put in your packet, which basically shows you the things that they'll be covering. So it's not that we need to go into necessarily into detail, but these are the things that these jail administrators will be covering at their conference. And I want to show you, one, both our participation, and two, some of the things that other South Carolina jail administrators will be dealing with and addressing via this conference. So I'll take any questions that you have, Mr. Chair, but really that was more for information and a little bit of detail because I know you all want to know how we're trying to be better.
No questions, you can continue.
All right, the next item in your packet was an item that's 4C.
4C.
Which is the 5th and 11th Judicial Circuit's SC Courts Mental Health Initiative. And what I want to show you in here, and we'll just go to a couple of pages. I know there's quite a few, but what the courts have noticed and they're trying to work on is how to address various issues that exacerbate our jail situation. So you have individuals who are put in a position where they're being housed in a detention or correctional facility, and they may have issues that are troublesome for them. So for example, if you look in here, and we'll just go to page 15, thank you. You can see that these numbers show just general information about the number of Americans with mental illness and substance abuse. And then as you go throughout the presentation, what you will find out is that it talks about, on page 17, the number of folks with mental illness that are represented in the court system. And the reason why that matters is because you go and you look at that, it says there are serious mental illness is 4 to 6 times higher in jail than in the general population. And I think that's important to understand because we talk about this concern, but it doesn't really get addressed because the jail is a detention environment. It is not a mental health institution, and it sounds kind of coy when you say it, but what we have to understand is we don't have hundreds of medical professionals and they're dealing with individuals with mental illness. You have officers who have been ideally trained to make sure people are safe and secure, but maybe not able to identify as a clinician would, someone that is acting because of a serious mental illness or some sort of disorder. And I bring that up because of when we talk about the job of a detention officer and we're trying to hire people in, and we talk about the responsibilities that we're placing on them, what you find out is that we're really asking for really more than just make sure people are safe and secure. We're asking them to, in some respects, to be clinicians, to be psychiatrists or psychologists, to understand and be able to perceive when people are having some sort of mental challenge or breakdown. And in some instances, folks are just not equipped to do that. And not because they're not maybe good detention officers, but because that's a little bit more than someone who has been trained for years in the field of sociology or the like to deal with these types of things. So just bringing this out that the court system, and they're trying to deal with these things, are recognizing that there's a pattern in here that needs to be addressed. And they're trying to figure out how to do it on their end because these people are all trickled down from the court system, unfortunately, to the jail. So I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, in case there's anything you want me to
Yes, sir.
address.
So I probably have more of a statement than a question. The statement is I totally understand where the 5th and the 11th Circuit Court is coming from, but I do want to say this. If we know that our jails are housing mental health patients, what are we doing as far as leadership to prepare our staff to be able to recognize when somebody's going through those types of breakdowns? And I say that to say this, just with some of my background and my experience. When I was in college, I worked at the South Carolina Department of Mental Health, and I definitely didn't have a terminal degree in mental health to be able to recognize when a patient was having a mental illness. I was trained to be able to see the signs and understand the signs. Are we doing anything to give our staff the support and undergird the experiences to help them understand and be able to recognize so we can get those detainees the help that they need immediately, instead of us saying that we're not trained to do it, and we know that and there's nothing that we can do to stop the housing of mental health patients. What are we doing to be proactive to be able to head off some of this, some of the mental health episodes that our inmates are experiencing, detainees are experiencing, and getting them the proper help in a timely manner?
It's a very good question, and that is part of the process. And I think that in acknowledging this information, it's just really more of an awareness that instead of the detention center being the voice of, we have mental health patients that we are dealing with, we have outside entities who recognize that mental health patients are flowing through the detention center. And so it really was more about an outside voice sharing that information rather than it seeming like Alvin S. Glenn was, to your point, trying to use some sort of reasoning for not addressing what they can. So we are doing that, and that's part of what the mental health courts are saying here, is that there needs to be a collaboration where entities like Alvin S. Glenn and other agencies work to try to address this by taking an active step in that process and being a part of the solution. And so that's really why I was, sharing this. But yes, sir, that is part of the process that individuals are as a part of their 40 hours of training. And I'll just turn this to make sure that's appropriately, because I believe there's 40 hours that they have to have, and that does include some level of awareness related to mental health.
Questions from anybody on the committee?
I have one, but Ms. English can go.
Ms. English, you recognize?
Really a question, but more of a statement, because sometimes we have to understand, even though we're dealing with mental illness, there's a level of criminal activity that comes with that, and we've got to be prepared on both levels. And our justice system has to deal with that first, because safety is always going to be that first issue. And then the second issue is, once those detainees are detained, then being able to deal with their mental illness or the things that come along with it. But we've got to maintain that safety, and the public has to understand that it is a detention center, or it is a facility housed for those that have, committed those criminal activities. We're going to keep supporting them. We're going to keep supporting our staff with ongoing efforts. But mental illness is something that is real, and a lot of people just don't understand it. I've worked with it for over 20 years, and it's extremely hard. I could be standing here with the axe in my hand just doing this, and you may not know that in my mind I'm thinking I'm swatting a fly, but at the same time you're looking at me and you're thinking I'm a danger to you. So it's understanding more of what's going on with that illness. So that's I'm glad you brought this to us, because it's something that really needs to be put out there, and it's something that people need to understand. This is ongoing, and it will be for years to come. So thank you, Mr. Brown, for putting this in there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Mr. Wright?
I did want to say before you go on that, and I did want to remind everyone that Alvin S. Glenn, just as all local detention centers are short-term, or supposed to be short-term detention facilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the thing about that is that really the people that come through, it really is supposed to be a flow where no one is really supposed to be there for more than like a year. And we have people that have been there for 3, 4, 5 years, and it's not because of anything that's because of the administration or Alvin S. Glenn, because of the court system, because of other things. And so it's almost like we're having to be a long-term corrections facility, which is not what Alvin S. Glenn is or has ever been designed to be, and or funded to be. Really, it's supposed to be a short-term detention facility, but we are doing things to try to deal with the issues with mental health, substance abuse, all these other things. But I do want people to keep in mind that what it actually is a short-term detention facility, which is supposed to be a flow-through.
Before we move on to item 4D, I just want to acknowledge my colleague Allison Terratio and thank her for joining the committee today. Mr. Brown, you can continue.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. As we move to item 4D, the information that's in your packet, again, represents information that was put together by the National Center for State Courts, and it represents the judicial's review of how they could try to impact the issue that the courts have, which ultimately impacts for us the detention facility. And so they just kind of put some things out there that talked about what they've kind of learned from their review of this issue. And then the next thing that they're doing is locally, there's a statewide mental health summit scheduled for October 30th. Each time the court system has met to discuss mental health, we've been present. We wanted to understand how we could be a part of the solution. We wanted to show that Alvinus Glen Detention Center, county administration, sees this as a serious concern, and that we want to make sure that we can be at the table when we talk about how we can help address this and how we can account appropriately for people that have mental health issues that may be in our detention facility. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes really all the information that I have for today, but certainly we'll take any additional questions that you may have or members of the committee or council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I appreciate you for answering those questions. Does anyone on the committee have anything they want to say or any questions? If not, we're going to move to number 5, adjournment.
Move, Mr. Chair.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Ms. Carrillo, can you call for the vote, please?
Pugh,
Yes.
Walker, English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
We are adjourned.